Alrighty, good morning, ladies and gentlemen and ladies, FinTechies and FinTechers. Very good morning to you all, and welcome to the third time that UOB, PwC, and the Singapore FinTech Association have collaborated in the creation of the regional ASEAN FinTech report, this year entitled Digital Takes Flight. Today we have a wonderful array of panelists that will be going through some of the report findings, and getting their thoughts and feedback in terms of what this means, both in terms of the fintech space in Singapore and the wider trends and developments that we are seeing across the ASEAN region as well. But first, for your viewing pleasure, we have a video to take you through.
The day they lifted the lockdown, I was a changed man.
I found out how to persevere through bad times and good times.
Though money was tight, I learned how to grow it bit by bit.
I learned that the only way to become good at something new is to start doing it.
Although buying online is different from going to a shop, you still get to enjoy the products you love.
Working in FinTech, I realized that constraints can help you figure out how to cut inefficiencies and build a better product.
Cash has given way to e-wallets, payment and loyalty apps, and QR codes. Currency, and what we understand it to be, has broadened its horizons. Funding into fintech is at an all-time high. In Singapore, fintech firms received a total investment of US $1.6 billion, the highest in the last 5 years. Digital financial services have been in the spotlight long enough, and now it's time for it to take flight.
And to take us through the report findings and how the digital services are taking flight across ASEAN, I'm now joined by three fantastic panelists. We have Arthur Long, the Head of Strategy, Projects, Investments and Digital Engagement at UOB. We have Sharad Ayabi, President of the Singapore FinTech Association, and Wan Yi Wong, the FinTech Leader at PwC right here in Singapore. Welcome panelists, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Colin, for having us. Hi.
So we saw some wonderful and hopefully very positive headline numbers from that video, and also that can be found in the report. So starting with the fundraising aspect, we saw over $3.5 billion US in fundraising raised just in the first 9 months of 2021 alone. This is a substantial improvement over what we saw last year, but also from what we uncovered with some of the interviews and insights that we garnered, the funding hasn't necessarily been that well distributed across the range of fintechs in the spectrum. It seemed to be very focused on the late stage investing side of things. Also in terms of the markets, it was very much Singapore and Indonesia that dominated. And also a lot of the funding went to the large mega deals. Over 10 or so of the major 13 funded firms were in that late stage category. So getting some of your thoughts on this and what it potentially means for the wider impact across the ASEAN fintech scene. Arthur, perhaps starting with you, in terms of this early versus late stage potential imbalance, what are some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, thanks, Connor. I think, as we look at the fundraising across the different ASEAN countries, and more towards the late stage companies, I think that's where a lot of investors are putting their money where they think it's a bit safer coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think that, we should not neglect the smaller fintechs as well. I think that's where there is still innovation, that's coming out of these smaller fintechs. But across ASEAN, we see that, over the past couple of years, the number of fintechs that have been started year on year have been kind of reaching a plateau as well. So I think in terms of being innovative and trying to come up with things which have not already been done, it will get progressively more and more difficult, I would say.
Sure, interesting. And Shadab, given that Singapore accounted for the plurality of fundraising received, that must be good news for the local fintech and investor scene here. What are some of the things that you're seeing within the wider Singapore FinTech Association member base? And what are some of your thoughts in terms of what it means across ensuring that both the early stage, the mid stage, and those late stage investment firms are able to attract funding? And what are some potential initiatives or other policies that could be put in place to ensure that funding is going where it's needed and encouraging that grassroots startup scene to be funded and hopefully permeate and really accelerate growth of fintech across ASEAN?
Thank you, Connell, and for the question. And Arthur, thank you for your comments as well. Let me just first start by congratulating the team to have launched the report in a good amount of in I would say relatively shorter period in terms of going through the due diligence and making sure that the report covers the aspects of the ASEAN. And it's equally heartening to see the results, which is basically we have had a very good inflow of funds coming into the ASEAN fintech companies. Now, I have a slightly different view here, Connell and Arthur, in terms of how the funding has actually gone into the different fintech. So let me just highlight one aspect, which is we are looking at a deal funnel here. So by the very nature of the deal funnel, there will always be a lower number of companies in Series C and Series D compared to, let's say, pre-seed or Series A as an example. And equally, the quantum of money or the quantum of investment funds that are going into the later stage companies will, of course, be higher on a per company basis, much higher compared to the early stage companies. So if I were to look at the data that we have in this report, out of the 13 that are in top 10, actually 3 of them are Series A and Series B, totaling about $650 million out of the $2 billion in the top 10, which is almost amounts to 30% of the $2.2 billion there. So that itself shows that there is still a good amount of funding, in terms or interest that is going into the early stage companies as well. And of course, the average deal size has increased from 9 million in 2020 to 21 million in 2021, which shows that the maturity of the fintech ecosystem is there. And of course, if you look at both Singapore and in Indonesia, we can see that there has investment that has gone into various different segments equally in the fintech space, which just shows that the market or the industry has matured to a stage where you have more of these funds coming into the various segments, as well as both the early stage and the late stage companies as well. Of course, the quantum, like I said, will be higher for the late stage companies. And equally, I think it says a lot about the growing fintech ecosystem in not just Singapore, but also across the region as well, because of course the numbers speak for themselves. So I'll pause here.
Yeah, if I can just add on, I think I totally agree with you, Shadab. And just to note also that, one of the top 3 companies are Grab Financial Services. They raised $300 million, but, they're also backed up by a wider Grab parent company. So I think the lines are not so clear anymore, whether it's Series A or Series B. But I think in terms of the large ticket items, I think the investors would really want to make sure that the money works for them as well. So I think that's why the weightage, towards more of the late stage companies last year or this year.
Cool, thanks for that. And finally, to 1E, in terms of both the split between the early stage and the late stage, also you work a lot with the investors coming into the region, and there were some comments that we received from interviews around the preference that currently exists for a lot of the local firms seeking funding to go with the global investors over the local or the regional investors. So what are some of your thoughts around that and the time frame for, I guess, redressing that balance so we start to see more of a local bias towards the investors when the fintechs are going out there and pitching for funding?
Thanks, Connell, for the question. Yeah, I do think that a lot of the fintechs are looking out for strategic investors. So they're looking out for investors who can help them expand pretty rapidly or give them support where they do not have reach. And this is why I think global investors tend to be a bit more attractive given they have the global footprint. So for local investors to align the interests with the startups or with the fintechs, I think it's important to know that the reach of the investors are aligned to where these fintechs are trying to get to. So it depends on the countries that they want to expand into. The strategic alignment is very important. I think it's also very important for the startups and fintechs, together with the investors, to be able to collaboratively achieve resilience and agility. I think these two words are the most important, especially as still within the pandemic and hopefully coming out of pandemic soon. So what's important is, as we have seen in the past 2 years, the market can change really rapidly. And it's not just important for you to have a strategy that it's sticky, but instead it has to be very flexible if you have any unforeseen market circumstances. And with that, I think the investor that can guide them along in this, to guide them along to help them achieve agility while being resilient, is actually very important. And this will be what I will share with the local investors.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on that. So turning from the amount that was raised to where that funding was deployed, for the second year in a row, payments received a substantial amount of the inflows that were raised. And when we compared that against the survey results that we had, it was actually fairly interesting, because on one side, the institutional interviews that we undertook with investors, with fintech associations, with a lot of the fintechs themselves, indicated that digital payments were really the rage. And we've seen other supporting evidence of that, with a massive shift to digital given the current economic and pandemic environment. Comparing that to the survey results, though, cash was still very dominant across a lot of the markets, with some markets still very much focusing and utilizing cash on delivery, even though the e-commerce space had boomed there. We also saw some increase in the buy now, pay later space, which we'll touch on soon. But with regards to the actual discrepancy we're seeing between the rise of e-payments, digital wallets, and the rest of it, and the fundraising they're receiving, with the still strong preference that we're seeing across the ASEAN consumer base for using cash, are digital payments really the way forward, or will cash remain entrenched in a lot of segments of society going into the future? Arthur, perhaps sharing your thoughts from the traditional financial institution background.
Yeah, thanks, Connell, for the question. I think we've seen, even in our surveys and even in the transactions that we see in the bank, 7 out of 10 in Singapore said that since the onset of COVID-19, they have increased the use of digital payments, cashless payments, as well as the use of credit and debit cards, mobile apps, as well as e-wallets. So I think the trend is here to stay. And you see that for even in the survey, cash is the most used form of payment for only 13% of Singaporeans. So I think we are headed towards a cashless society, but perhaps not yet cash-free, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, great. And Shadab, in terms of the fintechs in Singapore operating in the digital space, are there any conversations that you've had around them regarding their optimism for the adoption of moving Singapore to a cashless society, and other markets across the ASEAN region? Are there any in particular that they're very optimistic for moving forward with cashless payments? And are there any that their reporting would probably stay fairly rooted in the cash payment system for a while longer?
Thanks, Connell, for the question. I think so. So from my perspective, I'll break it in two parts. One is, whether there is preference or I would say attraction towards the customers in terms of using digital payments. Yes, of course, there's no doubt about that. Most consumers would want to go digital as much as possible, usage of digital payment methods as well as e-wallets as much as possible. And we can see that it's quite prevalent in Singapore as much as possible. Multiple modes that are being used. The MAS has also helped with coming up with a unified SGQR code as well to allow for these digital payments to be more easily accessible, by the consumers. Now, I would say from the fintech space or from fintech side of things or from the merchant side of things, there is a slight bit of a challenge there in terms of the interchange or the MDR fees that is applicable for some of these digital payments. So specifically for really low margin businesses, these MDR fees could actually be a good significant portion of the overall margin that they have. And that could be an impediment. That's why we are seeing that cash is still prevalent in our societies. I mean, I'm not just talking about Singapore, in ASEAN in general. So I would say if there is a concerted effort through the industry, through the policymakers, as well as the associations, we should probably be looking at solving that problem as well, because in the end, the adoption will only happen when there are more adoption will only happen when there are more merchants accepting digital payments as much as possible. And I think we are definitely in the right place to do that, given we are already seeing a lot of tailwinds in that respect. We are not far from there.
Okay, wonderful. And another area where the insights from the interviews didn't necessarily line up with what we saw from the survey was in the buy now, pay later space. This was given a much more sexy term in the interviews with data-led lending being the tag that was applied to that. And certainly from the institutional interviews that we undertook, there was a very strong feeling that this was an area that had certainly taken off quite substantially in the last year. It was being very highly utilized across a range of fintechs, from the e-wallet side to e-commerce and to other lending platforms and providers. But where it came to the survey results, as we'll see in a second on the slide, there wasn't actually too much demand for it. Only around 1 in 3 of the users, of the consumers surveyed, certainly tried to use buy now, pay later or data-led lending. More preferred to pay certainly upfront for everything. And then nearly half really wanted to go for the credit card installment plans, which certainly anyone who's bought anything off Lazada recently would know the ease and convenience of that. So where it comes to the outlook for data-led lending, buy now, pay later, compared to the more traditional forms of payment through credit cards or simply paying cash on delivery, what are some of the outlooks for that, and why do you think there is that disparity there? Wani, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I would say it's really purely just timing, actually. What I see is that buy now, pay later, it's coming fast and furious. So it's at this point where we have a lot of solutions that are actually expanding really fast. But if you look at the buy now, pay later players in ASEAN, actually they're pretty young. A lot of them have only started just the past 1-2 years. Albeit they're not standalone. A lot of them are not standalone. A lot of them are either spin-off or an extension of services by the current fintechs. But the services actually have been offered probably starting 2019. Of course, there are a few that have started early, like Credivo in Indonesia started way earlier. But a lot of them started 2019, 2020, and it's coming up fast and furious. And this is why I think while you see a lower end of 31%, as you've seen on the screen, this number is going to go up really quickly and rapidly in the next few years. And I would say that this scheme, it's at the start, I think it's targeted at more the younger consumers. So given that we have actually surveyed a wide spread of respondents, that there would be some skill in terms of responding. But of course, we see that a lot of the younger players respondents are actually more adventurous. They would like to try this out. And also in different countries where they may not be able to get a credit card so easily. These are the areas that they will actually try out buy now, pay later as well. Of course, we will see this expansion a bit slower in those countries that actually the unbanked population is still pretty big. That's take time to get to them in terms of these services.
Okay, great. And Arthur, from the perspective of a traditional financial institution, UOB has credit cards, and I'm sure from the digital side of things, you're also looking for buy now, pay later. So from what you're seeing in terms of the survey responses, is there something that gives you a positive outlook for the growth of the space? Is it good that people are still relying on the credit card aspect? What are some of the thoughts going around that?
Yeah, thanks, Connell. I think from UOB's perspective, we do think that in certain countries, certain demographics, there is ample demand for buy now, pay later. So for example, in Indonesia, we are launching buy now, pay later soon with our Tomorrow app. I feel that we need to be in a place where we need to experiment, but yet be also very conscious that central banks could flip the switch at a moment's notice. So we just need to tread carefully. But as we said before, also with our CFO announcing that it's actually less risky relative to unsecured loans, because we actually know what you're buying. But with that, we do see two different segments. One, the existing credit card segment. Credit card users actually are very happy with the points that they're earning right now. So they see very little impetus or motivation to switch over to buy now, pay later completely. And I think the other important aspect for buy now, pay later is that there is an element of a moral hazard, right? Because if you are an SME owner, you would definitely welcome buy now, pay later with open arms. But if you are a parent of a teenager, you probably would say no to your teenagers if they wanted buy now, pay later. You would also not be very, very thrilled, I think, if your spouse came home and told you that he or she signed up for all the buy now, pay later providers. So I think there's an education aspect there as well, where it's something new, it's something convenient, but yet there are consequences to not keeping up with your payments. There are consequences with not being able to track how you're spending across buy now, pay later as well. So I think it is still in the early stages, but there is a lot to be done in this area as well. So it's not just the provision of buy now, pay later, but how do you actually use it safely, right?
Okay, excellent.
Thanks, Connell.
Oh, cheers, thank you. And just in the final 5 minutes, looking forwards to the next frontier that we're going to be seeing across FinTech and ASEAN. We had some interesting responses both from the survey and the interviews with regards to the advent of cryptocurrencies, tokenization, central bank digital currencies and their implementation, what that could mean, the rise of ESG and sustainability, and how various aspects of FinTech could be applied to that, and the rest of the development in that space. So just getting a little bit of time from each of you, what are some of the, what are your thoughts around which area or areas will be the next segment that's really poised for growth across ASEAN as a whole, or specific markets within ASEAN? And if there's anything that's needed from the various policymakers across the region or initiatives that need to be launched to facilitate this, some insights into what that would be great to hear. So Shadab, let's start with you from the FinTech Association perspective. What are some of your thoughts in terms of the outlook for the next FinTech frontier across ASEAN?
Thanks, Connell. I think, in my opinion, of course, given that we are having the Singapore FinTech Festival with the theme of Web 3.0, it's obvious to say that there will be a huge, we are expecting a good growth of companies which have their business models aligned across, blockchain distributed ledgers. That is definitely going to happen. And if you look at broadly the other themes as well, including such as ESG and sustainability, we already have quite a few mature companies that are operating in that space. And I think there was an announcement on Project Greenprint also yesterday by MSMD. So there is definitely growth coming in, and with growth, of course, there will be more requirement for standards for assessment frameworks as well, which we are equally participating with the participants, with the companies, our members at the moment as an association. So we are helping to frame some of those standards as well. But if I were to look at it at a higher level, I think the growth, the broader success criteria, if you look at ASEAN, we are probably looking at 10 to 15 IPOs from ASEAN FinTech in the next 2 years. I think that would be the key measure, in my opinion, in terms of how mature we have grown as the ASEAN FinTech ecosystem. And for that to happen, I think one of the key ingredients is simpler laws, simpler rules and regulations in place. And as SFA, as the association, we also have multiple advocacy channels or groups that we run with the policymakers. So definitely would want to urge the policymakers to think in that regard. There are already actions happening, but if there were easier, I would say more efficiency in supporting international investors to come in, and also to keep it simple and attract more deals and IPOs in the region, it just puts the flag for us to have grown into a mature fintech ecosystem.
Sure, wonderful. So Wani, from your perspective, working with a lot of fintechs and startups in Singapore and across the region, and the investors as well, what are some of your thoughts and what you see with regards to that next frontier for ASEAN FinTech?
Thank you. I'll make it quick so that Arthur gets to speak as well. So I agree with Shadab with what he has mentioned. I'll just add on. I think I do see that there will be consolidation in terms of a lot of services coming together as one platform, because consumers still prefers convenience, one-stop shop. So I think that's actually probably going to be the next frontier, and you see that services that actually complement each other may come together to offer the one-stop shop for consumers. The other thing for the fintechs, which I think it's important, is that the regulations and the rules, as what Shadab mentioned as well, should evolve. It should evolve with the development of technology. It should also evolve to ensure that it is relevant to what we are working on. It means that we may not use what maybe, for example, this 10 years ago, where we think that this is the standard. We may not always have to keep to that standard. There could be deviation. It means that it could be more stringent. It could also mean that there could be some leniency for certain fintechs as they are at maybe a more earlier start stage, but without much risk. So with the risk controlled, the rules and regulation can actually vary for them. So that's just my contribution for this part.
Well, thank you. And Arthur, in the final minute or so, your thoughts on the future of fintech and what's the next frontier for this digital space?
Yeah, many areas of growth in fintech, I feel, and ASEAN, with more people on smartphones, 5G coming, I think it's all very exciting. But I think fintechs ultimately still need to come back to why they exist and what they are doing for their customers. The needs of the customers are likely to remain the same, right? Access to credit when needed, the ability to safeguard their deposits, grow their wealth. But now with the added, criteria to do it sustainably, and also to hopefully minimize or reverse climate change as well for future generations. So I think that's something to keep in mind. What you're doing, is it good for the customer? Is it good for the climate? Is it good for the country? I think we just need to keep all those in mind as well, and not just push for fractionalization or financial inclusion at all costs. So I think it's really important to bear that in mind. Thanks, Connor.
Sure, wonderful. So that's it for us in terms of timing. So thank you to all the panelists for those wonderful insights, and thank you to the audience members who joined along for this. We did barely scratch the surface on the insights garnered in the report, so do download it from the QR code that you have here. There's much more data, there's much more insights looking at the various trends and the key developments that we highlighted. Plus we have all the quotes from the fintech associations, the fintechs themselves, and the investors that we interviewed. So many more insights to be found in there. If you do have any inquiries, do reach out to the media email there, and we'll be in touch with you to answer any questions you have. So once again, thank you very much to all the panelists, and to everyone else. Thank you for joining, and enjoy the rest of the Singapore FinTech Festival 2021.
Thanks, Conal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Conal.
Thanks, everybody.
Conal.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
All right.